Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going back one more time to talk about the new album from Queens of the Stone Age, Like Clockwork. Now look, for the longest time this year, I ignored Queens of the Stone Age and their newest album entirely. And really, that was a huge mistake. Mostly linked to the fact that I had a few major misconceptions about the band that I only really knew from the few singles I heard from Era Vulgaris 6 years ago. As I said a number of times, I skipped over most rock throughout the 2000s and jumped straight into power metal and symphonic metal. And Queens of the Stone Age were just one of those bands I ignored because I assumed they were just some other post-grunge or hard rock band that somehow managed to get rave reviews because, hey, something in that genre had to do well. But as I said, big mistake, and I spent the past 3 weeks atoning for that mistake and listening through the band's discography and realizing some major errors in my thinking. For one, Queens of the Stone Age are one of those acts that really defy genre classification. They've done hard rock, they've flirted with psychedelia and alternative metal, and while they've worked with Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl, I wouldn't call them post-grunge by any stretch of the mind. Also, they're awesome, as in one of the best rock metal acts of the decade. I say my opinion that Era Vulgaris is their worst album, but even that's by no means bad. As to my favorite Queens of the Stone Age record, you know what? I'm honestly going to go with Lullabies to Paralyze. Simply because the nightmarish fairy tales that Josh Homme wrote about added a lot of twisted flavor to the songwriting, and the album had some simply phenomenal grooves and melodies that I really did love. And thus, having completed my heel-face turn regarding Queens of the Stone Age, I was psyched to hear their newest album, albeit 6 months late. And I'd be remiss not to mention the importance of Like Clockwork or the troubled production process that actually preceded it. Longtime Queens of the Stone Age drummer Joey Castillo was fired about a third of the way through the recording and replaced with Dave Grohl. And Josh Homme recruited singers like Trent Reznor, Alex Turner, Jake Shears, Elton John, and even former Queens of the Stone Age bassist Nick Oliveri for backing vocals. And this was their first album in 6 years, when Josh Homme had gone off to do other projects like Them Crooked Vultures. Did Like Clockwork actually manage to work? Well, duh, of course it did. This album has been critically acclaimed all year, and it deserves it because Like Clockwork is a great album and one of the band's best. And since we've reached the time of the year where critics publish their personal year-end list, don't worry, mine's coming, Like Clockwork is either in the top 10 or the comments section are overloaded with people angry about its exclusion from that top 10. But then again, since I'm doing this review 6 months late, there's honestly not a lot I can say that hasn't already been written by dozens of other critics over the past 6 months, which means I'd have plenty of cause to just say, screw it, it's awesome, and get up and walk away. But you know what, considering how great this album is, I feel obliged to give it at least some degree of due diligence. So okay, let's start with the instrumentation and production. And really, if we're looking for an album that could soar on that basis alone, Like Clockwork would definitely fit the mold. The greatest strength I've always found with Queens of the Stone Age is that the fact that they never compromised their melody lines in favor of heavy grooves or breakdowns, although they definitely deliver the former. And since Josh Homme has always had a strong pop sensibility, these moments are where the melodies get center stage or where this album really roars to life, with songs like If I Had a Tail, Fairweather Friends, My God Is the Sun, and I Sat by the Ocean rising up with some of the band's best tracks ever. Now, look, I do have a few niggling criticisms here. I'd wish the bass production on a few tracks was a little bit heavier, a little bit more potent and thunderous. There are a couple of melody choices that don't quite gel with the rest of the mix, and the album does take a little bit of time to get going, but those are some fairly minor points on an album that has this much swaggering power and the Bowie-esque confidence in which to carry it. And all of this is carried on backing end by Josh Homme's delivery. Now, his voice has only gotten richer with age, and his wide range does wonders for the variety and texture on this album. The man has always had a lot of charisma, and he's smart enough to play things quieter to draw in more attention. Now, one thing's definitely for certain though, this is Josh Homme's project front and center, and that list of backing players that I mentioned before, they can be occasionally tough to hear in the mix if you don't know which of them are on which song. On the one hand, this does make sense when it comes to the album's theme and progression, but on the other hand, it strikes me slightly as a bit of a misuse of the talent, and I would like to see more of them in the mix, or more dynamics between the various singers. Just, can you imagine how powerful and potent a Trent Reznor, Josh Homme duet would be? just potential possibilities for the future. But as I said, this is Holmes' baby, front and center, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the lyrics and themes, both of which are entirely focused on the concept of moving on from the past and the passage of time. We get flashes of Holmes' punk sensibilities that we've seen in the past, with songs like If I Had a Tail, which viciously satirizes the concept of selling out and becoming that massive overnight success through comparisons of regression to bestiality. But the focus is much tighter on this album as a whole, with no inclusion of any bonus tracks whatsoever, which pays big dividends on the album's progression from fearful hesitation to confidence and acceptance of change, with the turning point coming at the bleak desert rock inspired My God Is the Sun. And once that switch is flipped, the change rockets forward and the album just breezes through the next 3 tracks with a ton of momentum as Holmes just deposits needless links to the past with songs like Colopsia and Fair Weather Friends. And yet, even then, Holmes maintains that fantastic rhyme nuance that has always characterized his best work and his writing, with the reflective track I Appear Missing discussing how his acts of moving forward can affect those that he cares about in his life, even if they don't initially care that he's gone at all, or that they realize that he's made these changes or impacts. And then it all comes together in spectacular fashion with Like Clockwork, ending with typical Queens of the Stone Age melancholy with some of the best lyrics of Josh Holmes' career. And this track does one thing that I like to point out, and that elevates it and the album as a whole into something really special and worthy of inclusion on my list. It shades the pessimism of It's All Downhill from Here with richer context, showing that, well, change will be difficult for someone, even if it's not for the person who is changing. And yet, that change is inevitable, and holding on will only make things worse in the end, whether or not be through some relationship that should have expired long ago, or a band changing new directions for a new album coming out 6 years after their previous one. In a way, Like Clockwork ends up becoming a meta-textual analysis and critique of the band's own creative process throughout creating this album, and has enough richer nuance to earn that dramatic payoff, which you rarely see. In fact, it'd probably be the first band since, well, I don't know, Random Access Memories by Daft Punk that has that much discussion upon the creative process, and it was truly a treat to hear. So in short, I love this album. That's probably pretty obvious by now. Like Clockwork is going to make my year-end list of the best albums of the year, and it will deserve its high position on that list. Between the phenomenal melodies and grooves, the Bowie-esque tone that balances confident acceptance of change with wry observations of its effects and its aftermath, and Josh Holmes delivering an emotionally compelling performance to absolutely seal the deal in the end, this album easily deserves its 9 out of 10 and a high recommendation from me. If you haven't listened to Like Clockwork by Queens of the Stone Age, well, what are you doing? Go listen to it. But you're doing yourself a serious disservice by ignoring it, because not only is this band back, they're better than ever. Check them out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like to hear me cover from this year before the end of the year, I'm more than happy to take a listen. Just make sure to check through my previous videos, see if I haven't already covered it at some point this year. Until then, see you next time.